welcome to the HoosLeft podcast, a show about Indiana politics, history, and culture from the unapologetic perspective of the Hoosier left. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, and I'm recording from Bloomington. So, I've spent a lot of time talking about Christian nationalism this summer. But why? Last week, Karen Park joined the show to talk about radical traditional Catholicism because Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita swims in that milieu and very plainly governs like it. Previously, we have hosted Matthew Taylor on the dangerous New Apostolic Reformation, a charismatic Pentecostal offshoot deeply entwined in Trump world, because Republican Lieutenant Governor candidate Micah Beckwith speaks the exact same language they do. We began this exploration back in June with Indiana's own Andrew Whitehead, who gave us a crash course on Christian nationalism because the Beckwith nomination was a real kick in the ass. I might be biased, but I think they're all informative, captivating, and worth a listen. Now, I don't want you to get the impression I'm some God-hating, venom-spewing atheist who thinks there is no place for religion in public life. I am, in fact, non-venomous, and the Reverend Senator Raphael Warnock even had me saying amen on the first night of the recent Democratic National Convention. But I am an atheist, and I've told you all that before. I've studied all the world's major religions, East and West, but can't get myself over the supernatural hump to actually believe in any of them. I am incapable of blind faith. But you know what started me questioning in the first place? The hypocrisy of American Christians. Now, I do not mean to disparage Christianity, the Bible, or Jesus of Nazareth. In fact, I'm a big fan of his work, but Christianity is the dominant religion in this country and therefore most deserving of a critical eye. And from my youth onward, all I can remember is the most vociferous Christians being least like Christ. Hateful, bigoted men like Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and Franklin Graham. Charlatans like Jim Tammy Faye Baker, Jimmy Swaggart, and Benny Hinn. Grifters like Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, and Creflo Dollar. The whole Catholic Church child abuse scandal. All of the Republican officials using God as a cudgel on behalf of the billionaire class. This was the outward face of Christianity to me. And now, these Christian nationalists we've learned about at the center of an authoritarian movement? With all of that in mind, it's easy to forget that there are actually Christians in public life who took that healing the sick, feeding the hungry, loving thy neighbor stuff seriously. Like Warnock, who preaches from the pulpit once occupied by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Like my state senator, Shelley Yoder, who received her master's in divinity from Vanderbilt and previously ministered at Bloomington's First United Church of Christ. Like the Democratic candidate for my state House District, Pastor Thomas Horrocks, who preaches at Beechwood Christian Church in French Lick and serves as a chaplain in the Army National Guard. And like my guest today, Joel Levi. Having grown up in Anderson, Indiana, and attending Indiana Christian Academy from kindergarten through 12th grade, he went on to study at Anderson University, where he met his wife, Megan. In 2013, they moved to Nashville, Tennessee. After 7 years in the Music City, the Levis moved back to Indiana with their son Mitchell, settling in Cicero, a town in northern Hamilton County. In his own words from his campaign website, quote, "What if faith wasn't used as a weapon? What if politics were rooted in empathy? What if legislation was crafted around caring for our fellow neighbor? These questions are why I'm running for office." Picking up a few paragraphs later. My family and I currently attend Genesis Christian Church in Carmel. Yes, I am a Christian. This does not mean that I want to use my faith as a weapon. We see enough of that in current American politics. I want to use my faith as a way to unlock new empathy. Empathy to see others in a political party not as an enemy, but as an American citizen, mother, father, daughter, or son. End quote. In today's interview, Joel talks about what faith means to him and why his religion pushes him in a democratic, pluralistic, inclusive direction. We'll discuss the tragic events that told him he needed to get up and do something, and his top issue, gun reform. We also get his thoughts on the affordable housing crisis, abortion rights, environmental protection, and public education. But before we turn to that conversation, please consider supporting Who's Left with a financial contribution. I currently work as an independent craftsman during the day and work on this project whenever I can. This is what I want to be doing. More campaign finance research, more essays, a daily episode if we can get there, but I need your help. So, if you can, visit scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. For only $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help me push our state in a better direction, and maybe, if we reach critical mass, I can put down my tool belt and devote my full time to you, to this project, and to Indiana's future. So if you have the means, pause right now, go to scottaaronrogers.substack.com and subscribe at the paid level. And while the best way to help this project is monetarily, if you can't afford it at this time, you can still help. Subscribe at the free level over on Substack. Set your favorite podcast player to auto-download new episodes of the show. Rate and review the show on whatever platform you use. This helps new people find us. Follow me on social media at facebook.com/HoosLeft. That's HOOS left. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same handle. On Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, I'm at ScottRog78. That's SCOTTROG78. And on Mastodon at ScottRog78 at Hoosier.social. Full video episodes of the pod are available on YouTube with clips on TikTok. The handle on both of those is at HoosLeft. Please subscribe on whichever platforms you use and send me a DM to discuss ideas for the project. But most importantly, share our message. Forward the articles to friends, family, and colleagues. Don't just like, but share on social media. Invite others to this community of Indiana leftists. It's lonely out here. And while I might be the guy with the microphone, I do try to take this thing where your input leads me. So please, leave feedback. Good, bad, or meh. I value it all. To those who have joined this community already, especially those paid subscribers, thank you so much. I am deeply honored by your support. And to everybody, thanks for listening. Now here's my interview with Joel Levi. Joel Levi, welcome to the Who's Left podcast. Nice to have you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to start by telling the people here a little bit about how we got connected here. Several weeks ago, I talked to Dr. Andrew Whitehead, professor at IUI, a renowned national expert on Christian nationalism.
Yes.
He said, "Hey, have you talked to Joel Levi yet?" And I said, "No, I don't know Joel Levi." He says, "You got to reach out to that guy." And I want to say he said, quote, "Good dude," unquote. So that is how I came to talk to Joel here tonight. So he comes with high praise. But Joel, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners here tonight?
Yeah, so first of all, just thank you so much for having me, Scott. But yes, my name is Joel Levi, and I'm the Democratic candidate for Indiana State Senate District 20. So me, my wife, and my 5-year-old son, Mitchell, we live in Cicero, Indiana. So that's the northern part of Hamilton County, the county right above Marion County. So, yeah, so that's a little bit about me and just like my role that I'm trying to run for this year. So hopefully trying to make some waves in Hamilton County as far as Democrats are concerned.
Yeah, I've got a good feeling about Hamilton County this year. I've talked to a couple people up there already. I think good things are happening for you guys. So, because I talked to Dr. Whitehead, and that's sort of our in, I've been thinking a lot about Christian nationalism lately. That's why I talked to him. I talked to Dr. Matthew Taylor, another expert on the topic, just recently. Um, you are, unapologetically a Christian. You wear your faith, but you're not like those guys. So, talk about your faith and tell us how that inspires you to get into public service and what differentiates you from these Christian nationalist types.
Right. And just so I can sort of set the scene a little bit. So I mentioned that my wife and I live in Cicero, Indiana. So we actually are about 10 minutes away from Micah Beckwith's church.
Oh,
Yeah. So we're sort of right there. He lives in my district and his church is in my district. So we're sort of right there in that scene of this sort of friction of ideology, sort of meeting like the public sphere. Because you may already know, but if you know a little bit about Micah Beckwith, who's now the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, had a pretty big run-in with Hamilton County Library Board, as last year trying to ban school and that sort of thing. But as far as differentiating myself from my faith and what you sort of see in that Christian nationalism sort of area, is the idea of what you do with your faith. I think for the Christian nationalist perspective, they see this sort of intersection of politics and power along with the faith that they desire for the country or the state. Whereas for me, the biggest reason that I really sort of got into politics, because we can go into this later, but I'm a non-traditional candidate, not a lawyer, not a doctor, or anything like that. But I feel that
we need more of that.
yeah, well, yeah,
Absolutely. More regular people. And not to disparage lawyers and doctors. I know many of them, and a lot of them are very fine people, right? But we need more diversity in the kind of people we send to Indianapolis. Sorry to interrupt, but like I think that's important that we need more of that. You go right ahead back in there.
I appreciate that because it was something I was self-conscious about first, but the more I've entered, sort of the political sphere, I realized that there aren't a lot of working class voices in the state house or in politics at large. But as far as just like how my faith interacts with politics is like the number one starting point for me is like, how can I love my neighbor as myself? And so I think like for me, and I listed on my website, the three things that I really concentrate on are my neighbor's safety, my neighbor's housing, and my neighbor's faith to practice without fear of retribution. And so for me, it's not about instilling my faith upon someone else, but trying to understand like, what would I want if it were me in the other person's shoes? Like, would I want to feel safe? Would I want to be able to have affordable housing? Would I be able to, if I had another faith, be able to express that freely without fear of, the government saying like it's not allowed? But what you see happen is you have now the 10 Commandments being put up in schools in Louisiana. You have, IVF rights being taken away in Alabama. Just recently, the state superintendent for Oklahoma mandated that Bible be taught in schools. And I think that is sort of the peak into the mindset of a Christian nationalist of just this coercive. I mean, if I were to sum it up, I would say the end point for Christian nationalism is a authoritarian theocracy. I think that's the end goal, is to basically say this is the religion of the land, along with democracy being chipped away.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree. Well, so I hate to get too deep into the Bible because that is
Yeah.
not my topic at all. But
Right.
I think there was a character in that book. His name was Jesus, and he said something about leaving unto Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah.
So leave the government sphere to the government sphere, and these things should not intersect, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you really see from Christian nationalism is that it's not really very Christian. They sort of use this historical background to sort of validate what they already wanted, which is usually like patriarchal, heterosexual, and generally, honestly, like a white culture sort of like trying to be protected with this. And Andrew Whitehead goes into it more. And I can't speak to the actual, because he's a doctorate in sociology, but there is this strain of white nationalism within Christian nationalism of trying to preserve what they view Americans are. They're trying to preserve conservative America, and a lot of that you read in between the lines, and some people are more blatant than others, but they're essentially trying to preserve the 50s, the 60s. Like when they say make America great again, like, well, America was great for certain people, 40 to 50 years ago, but not for everyone. And that's what you sort of see is the through line of just like, they have a certain way that they view America, and they're using the violence.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's they're nationalists in Christian clothing,
Right,
basically.
right.
And I've got to imagine, as a sincere Christian, that might piss you off a little bit.
Yes, yes. It does make me angry, which is why it's why I reached out to Andrew Whitehead to begin with. I do follow certain sort of anti-Christian nationalism sort of newsletters and that sort of thing. There's a group of people trying to be a voice of reason and love and inclusivity. And his book popped up. And so I was just like, whoa, like he lives in Indianapolis, I'm 30 minutes north of there. We definitely have to connect. But what really prompted some conversations, and I guess I can allude to this now, is I did have an interview with James Briggs from the Indy Star, along with Andrew Whitehead pretty recently. He hasn't released the interview yet. But I just felt like it was important for voices that are Christian to speak against what they're seeing, because I think that in some ways sort of shows the sincerity of it, because the way that I frame it, just as someone that could potentially, quote unquote, benefit from Christian nationalism, I feel compelled to speak against it. And hopefully that validates it. Like, this thing could benefit me, but it's wrong. And I feel like I need to be a voice for that. And I need to also like understand that like I have to own up to my own subset of people and people that believe a certain way and say they're hijacking it. It's not right. And it's actually goes against the golden rule, which is to treat your neighbor as yourself. And it's not like I guarantee you that those Christian nationalists, if it rolled in reverse, and let's say that there was a, Muslim nationalist policy that said,
oh my God, yeah.
I mean, they would be in arms. So it's not the golden rule. You're not treating your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I see that you really carry your faith into what you do, and so, is that one of the reasons you decided to jump into elected politics?
Yes, I would say if you view the Christian faith as being rooted in empathy, I would say 100%. And what really, I guess I could just give like a brief background. Is it okay to just do a little brief bio of like my life?
Absolutely, no, please. But we sort of skipped that, talking about how we got here. Please, no, absolutely, go deep. Tell us all about how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep it brief. But yeah, born and raised in Anderson, Indiana, northeast of Indy. Went to Anderson University. Met my wife there. So I actually went to college for music business. And so my wife went to school for so an interesting sort of career path there. But after we got married in 2012, we moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 2013.
Yeah.
So pursued the music industry. My wife went back to school to be a nurse practitioner. We were there in Nashville for 7 years. So my first foray into just the world of politics or understanding what the heck is going on was obviously Donald Trump winning the presidential election. I think that turned a lot of heads for a lot of people.
Yes.
But back in 2020, obviously COVID changed the trajectory of where the music industry was going. My wife, we moved back to Indiana in 2020. We had a 2-year-old at the time. As far as policy goes, it wasn't until 2022 in the shooting in Uvalde and sort of seeing what I would say is the closest thing to pure evil, which is someone going into the school and literally just the most vulnerable population and doing awful, atrocious things. And then following that was the shooting in Nashville, Tennessee. And that one was really close to home because we knew that area in Nashville in Green Hills. And essentially I came to the point where I saw so much violence and I saw the Republican Party capitulate and say that guns aren't the issue and defer.
Mm.
And like literally, like senators saying like, oh, it's an election year, we're not going to talk about guns, we don't want. Basically, politicians choosing political fortune over political conscience. And I essentially came to the point of just like, I got to do something. I literally am about to jump out of my skin because this is awful. I have at the time, a 4-year-old son. I need to do something for this state. So I mentioned Cicero. So it's a small little town in northern Hamilton County. It's entirely a little Republican town, little lakeside town. They literally actually have a Trump hill across the lake where someone mowed Trump into the side of it. So I
Classic.
yeah. So most people, when they run for office the first time, they run for town council, right? So there's no path there. A Democrat couldn't win. You zoom out a little bit further. I actually live in the Speaker of the House's district. So
okay.
Yeah, so Todd Houston. So I gerrymandered that with the surgeon's knife. And it's just basically unassailable. He has $1 million in his account. And then you zoom out a little bit further and it's state senate. And so what I realized is that Cicero, Noblesville, and then 35 precincts in Carl. So what I realized my path was, and this was the beginning of 2023, I was like, I feel passionate about common sense gun legislation and keeping our children safe. I think my options are either run for state senate or stay home and keep yelling at my TV saying like, isn't somebody going to do something? And that's essentially, a nutshell of just like how I sort of arrived here, because I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to start reaching out to people and figuring this out. So I reached out to Kristen Jones, the executive administrator for the Democratic senators. Senator Hunley, I got coffee with her. She just was recently elected in 22. She represents the eastern part of Indianapolis. I don't know if you're familiar with Senator Hunley at all, but
I've not spoken with her yet. I'm a little bit familiar with her work.
Yeah, but she's younger, so she's 40. I'm 36. So I think she resonated with just my story and being young and just trying to step out and do something new.
Yeah.
But for me, I guess all that to sum up is that I felt like my faith compelled me to do something and take action, because what if that was my son? Like, I can't imagine what it would feel like to send your child to school and not have them return. I mean, it's unthinkable, and I just don't see how politicians can choose their own careers over. Like, how is keeping children safe a partisan issue? Like, I don't understand it.
It pisses me off to no end. So Uvalde, Nashville, the Covenant School, that really drove you to get in. Did you know anybody down in Nashville that was affected?
So I didn't know any of the families, but that neighborhood I frequented often. There's a Green Hills Mall there. I have some friends that lived in the Green Hills area, because it was actually a small private Christian school, which also hit close to home because I owned a small private Christian school growing up with no security, no police, a very vulnerable, type school environment. So I just felt like I had to do something. All the while, as I started having coffees and meeting people, battling this imposter syndrome, I'm just like, well, hey, like, you used to be a musician, now you're a pharmacy technician, like, you want to run for state senate? Like, what? Yeah.
Hey, why not? Like, no, seriously, someone has to. So now, your gun control, your number one issue.
Number one.
That's what you're going to Indianapolis to do. So, how are we going to get that NRA captured supermajority to see the light?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's the biggest question. As I'm knocking doors, what I've noticed is that the subject of guns is very, very touchy. It hits a certain part in people, especially middle-aged white men. When it comes to your freedoms and what your rights are, I have to be very clear about my language, because I don't want to take away anyone's Second Amendment right. That is right. Trying to do by running. Like, my number one thing is common sense responsibility for a very dangerous and lethal technology. The closest comparison I have is my own experience, right? That's what I use. So I'm a pharmacy technician. I work at Riverview Hospital in Noblesville. And back in 2013, the same year that I moved to Nashville, there was legislation that prevented the mass amounts of Sudafed that you buy for over the counter. And it was just a common
Yeah.
sense thing did to prevent the abuse. Like I remember before, like 10 years ago, like people would like unload out of vans, like line up at CVS, they buy 10 boxes, there'd be 5 people and there's nothing you could do to stop it. Like that was just the reality of being a pharmacy
Wow.
tech. And now we have legislation that prevents that. And is it inconvenient? Yes, to get out your ID, blah, blah, blah. But
Yeah.
is it worth it to have a safer Indiana and to prevent, the sort of meth epidemic? I think, yeah, obviously, like, it seems like a no-brainer. So the framework I have to come at this is just a step that needs to prevent abuse. Because right now in Indiana, you could have a record of, let's say, domestic violence. You could literally have a criminal record in Indiana and still legally purchase a firearm from a private seller. And to me, that just seems like a loophole that should not exist and just allows violence to lead to more violence. Because I mean, if that same person were to go to Walmart or Dick's, like they would have to do a background check. Like these are things that we have in place in a lot of areas, but this one specific area, and I feel like it's really ripe for abuse and has been shown to be ripe for abuse. There's specific stories I've heard about people in northern Indiana seeing people drive across the border from Illinois to buy guns for private sellers at gun shows, and then
Oh, absolutely.
take them back to Illinois to Chicago. So this issue is even broader than Indiana itself.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that I have to approach it is just like, can I speak to the humanity, whether they be a Republican, whether whoever they be, a legislator, like from parent to parent, can we focus on keeping our children safe? And is that enough reason to not be beholden to lobbyists' efforts? Like, first of all, I got to serve the door. Like, that's before I get to the state house. But my plan, if elected in November, once in the state house, would be like, can I appeal to you, like father to father, like parent to parent, like what can we do to keep our children safe?
Um, I
It's
Yeah, gee, it is, and you wonder if cars were around in the late 1780s, if the right to have a car would have been in the Constitution, right? Because that is also a large, deadly piece of machinery that requires special training to use, right? You have to jump through all sorts of hoops to drive a car, right? You got to do the written test. You got to do the driving test, right? You
right.
got to have the license. You got to have the insurance. You got to go get your license renewed every now and then. Every time you buy or sell a car, there's all sorts of paperwork that you have to.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I mean, that your example with the Sudafed, absolutely great, on point. But to me, it's like a, a car is the most like reasonable comparison.
Right.
And if you don't know how to use the thing, you shouldn't be allowed to have the thing. And you should be able to show that you understand how it works, how to keep it safely, how to store it safely, and yada, yada, yada. Right? That seems reasonable. And I would think, I mean, if you look at point by point by point by point, even NRA members are in favor of a lot of reasonable gun restrictions.
Yes. Yes.
So it's a matter of translating that to legislation.
Yeah. And it's identity politics. Like if you're so tied to this idea of like us versus them, or if you paint Democrats in the light of they're trying to steal our guns or take our rights, it's like, no, like I have to combat that narrative. Just like, I'm not trying to take away your freedoms. This is about responsibility. In the same way that we have speed limits, it's like, yes, is it, nice to go fast, but we have these responsibilities within the sphere of freedom to prevent abuse on other people outside of your own life, your own bubble. And like, that's sort of the point, right? I mean, freedom with responsibility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So in addition to gun control. What else are you talking with people about while you're out there knocking doors?
Yeah, a big thing that I feel personally, or I've felt personally, is the cost or that the housing affordability crisis. I think it's felt pretty acutely in Hamilton County, but also I think across the state at large. Um,
Yeah.
just with the like, so I mentioned I'm 36 years old, and I always talk about the fact that I'm old enough to be blessed with the privilege of owning a home, but like
Hmm.
young enough to understand that like it's not a reality for a lot of people younger than me. They're either competing with like 7% interest rates, second and third time home buyers. When we bought in Indiana, I was this we were a second time home buyer. Baby boomers that are looking to downsize. I mean, there's so many factors that are going against, whether it be young millennials or Gen Zers, of just like the traditional path that baby boomers always say. It's just like go to college, graduate, get married, buy a house. Like that sort of math doesn't add up anymore. Like you can do all those things and still not be able to afford to buy a house. And I feel like this is my own opinion. I'd be interested to know what you think. Like, unless legislation or some sort of government plan is put in place, like these, at least in Hamilton County, like these apartment complexes are becoming just unattainable. Like basically,
Hmm.
you see like um, Gen Zers for the most part, but some millennials just like staying at home longer. And you sort of see this like gap now between like the haves and the have-nots. And it's just like I don't know if you ask like the property development, like they're trying to make a profit, they're trying to squeeze as much as they can. And I feel like there has to be a voice that speaks to that power of just like you cannot keep like right now you see certain apartment complexes in Hamilton County like a studio going for like $1,500 a month.
That's
And
insane.
it's absolutely
Yeah.
insane. And I feel like I need to be a voice to speak against that because to me it's just pure exploitation. Uh,
What do you chalk up as the reason for the high housing costs? I mean, we're just talking about apartments, right? The developers needing to get their cut. Um, um, and then the interest rates with mortgages for sure. Is there a supply and demand issue up in Hamilton County? Are there private companies coming in and paying cash and scooping up single family homes? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think with the home situation, and there has been some work done in Hamilton County at least to combat houses being bought like from like buyers out of state. That's
Mhm.
definitely an issue. But as far as the apartment complex, I can speak to that a little bit. And I think what you see is that a lot of these developers actually have ties to like Wall Street companies like out of state. So like
Oh yeah.
they're essentially like they're beholden to companies that have these huge conglomerates that are just trying to maximize their profit. And what that trickles down to, and I'll give you an example. When I announced that I was running for state senate last year, the trustee's office in Noblesville reached out to me and wanted to talk about sort of the housing crisis that she was seeing. And she sort of painted a picture of there's an apartment complex, I won't say the name, in Noblesville, that was about 80% occupancy. So rather than lowering their prices to meet market demands, they
Mhm.
decided to lower the requirements for leasing an apartment. So what they did is they would actually lower the amount of money required to show that you make monthly, bringing on volatile, I think she used an example of like an Uber driver,
Yeah.
like the most vulnerable artist working people. What happens is that, of course, life happens, cars break down or whatever. 2 to 3 months later, these people get behind on their rent, then they're evicted. So what these companies would rather do is rather than lowering their prices to meet market demand and fill the
Mhm.
entire complex, they would rather keep their rates the same, have someone that is very vulnerable and have an eviction on their record, kick them out. That eviction stays on the record for 5 years, and then have the next person come in. And that's how they view a sustainable working model. And I think that is purely wrong, pure exploitation. And unless legislation gets involved or some sort of account speaks to that, it's going to continue to happen. Like you almost have to have a voice that speaks to power in this situation.
Mm. But Joel, the free market.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, what kind of legislation would you propose? What do we do to fix that?
Yeah, I think one of the initial things that I just thought of, and other people can speak to this too. There's a really great group in Indiana called Prosperity Indiana. They do a lot of great
Mhm.
affordable housing advocacy and predatory lending work and all that kind of stuff, speaking against that. But I think it's increasing the amount in these new apartment complexes on sort of income based um, units. And I know, like, from a profit standpoint, that seems like, well, if we're lowering it based on income based units, like, we may not make as much money. But I guess I would speak back to that and say, we need we need everyone in the community
Mhm.
to function. And what I've seen is that you're actually pricing out working class people in your own community. Like, the trustee's office mentioned like a teacher that was going through a divorce, and she was one of the ones that was behind on her rent, trying to go to the trustee's office to get caught up. Like, we're literally about, at least in Hamilton County, and I can speak to District 20, we're about to price out teachers, firefighters, law enforcement, people that we need for a functioning community, because the housing is so profit driven that it can't even think about the fact that, like, maybe having an adjusted rate would actually benefit the community at large, if that makes sense.
Um, Now, me myself, as a good socialist, I'm like, you know what? We need some public housing in there. We need to bring back like public infrastructure, and part of that is maybe having more public housing to compete in the marketplace, and bring the prevailing rent down by offering a better deal. I don't know. I just look at Vienna in Austria, and I don't know if their public housing there is like legendary. Um, and I encourage anybody to look it up. But
Yeah.
it, it it got a bad rap here in this country
Right.
for a long time, and I'm a fan. I'm a fan of public
Yeah. And there is a stigma that you have to break down of, like, what affordable housing is, because you actually see the inverse happening now, because houses have become so expensive, whether it be demand or building supplies. They're actually calling, affordable housing in Hamilton County, like, houses that are in the high 300,000, so like the low 400s. And it's just like this idea of what,
housing. What whom?
right,
Yeah.
exactly. It's exactly right. And then there's this stigma that we have to break down, because this was actually just a recent article that came out in the Current, which is like a local Hamilton County
Yeah.
newsletter. But just, I think 2 months ago, they released an article stating that children that have graduated from IU or Purdue that want to move back to Hamilton County can no longer afford to move back, because the average house, at least in Carmel, that's south of here, is like close to $500,000.
Yeah.
And it's sad that it takes something that affects middle class white people in order for, like, change to happen, or some people to be like, oh, like, maybe we should do something about this housing crisis.
Yeah. Well,
But I think that's the situation. Yeah.
the zeal of a convert, right?
Yeah.
Like it's when, oh, this affects me now. Oh,
Right.
I'm gonna get real mad.
Right. Right.
Welcome to the club. Let's, you know what? Bring that energy. Bring that energy.
Yeah.
You'll love to see it. So, what else you talking to folks about out there on the campaign trail there, Joel?
Yeah. So, I mean, definitely, like, women's reproductive rights. I mean, that's a huge one right now. And I think there's a lot of momentum in Indiana, especially seeing, like, Jennifer McCormick as a Democratic candidate for governor, seeing some real, like, women in leadership running for office. Now you have the most recent update, of Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee. I just think there's a lot of momentum now building for, like, women having a voice, especially in Indiana. Um, there's a lot to combat there. And when I talk about this issue, I want to be very clear that, like, I can speak to, the other two sort of scenarios or pillars of my campaign. When it comes to women's reproductive rights, I have to say the obvious. Like, I'm a man. This is coming from a male's perspective. I want to always be clear that, like, I'm trying to learn and be a student of however I can support women's reproductive rights. But two is that in the state of Indiana, there's a real uphill climb towards really sort of battling sort of the abortion issue. So I don't want to like overpromise, be like, oh, vote for me because I can help fix, the abortion crisis in Indiana. Like, that is a very, very big piece and a very complex piece that I will obviously 100% advocate for. But I feel more versed in some of the other ones just because I can bring my own experience. And I hope that makes
No,
sense.
okay. Well, several things there. And I think it's important, number one, as a man, to realize that you don't know much about it and you should leave it to women and their doctors and medical professionals who do. I mean, that is kind of the essence of being pro-choice, I think. Like, as a man, like, unless I had something to do with it, that's none of my damn business, right?
Right.
And also, yeah, you realize that it's an uphill battle, and we are in a tricky spot. But just like every win Democrats get in Indianapolis this November, they pick up those 4 seats in the House and break that supermajority. You can start chipping away, and if Dr. McCormick can find herself in the governor's mansion, then she would provide a useful veto against some of their worst actions. So it's important to be honest and not overpromise, but we do have to get like a foothold on that beach.
Yes.
Right.
And you mentioned breaking the supermajority because that's huge. And if I could give a plug for my district, District 20, there are 2 House candidates that overlap with my district that the Democratic Party has had their eyes on, looking at hostilities to flip going into this November. So I think if that helps for your audience, set the stage for what District 20 is.
Yeah, please.
Are you familiar with Matt McNally at all?
I've seen some of Matt's stuff. He's very active on social media.
Yes.
I intend to reach out and try and get him here at some point. And I assume your second person is Josh Lowry in 24?
So not Josh Lowry. So there's
okay.
There's no Westfield in my district, but there is a Noblesville candidate.
Okay.
So
fantastic. Yes.
Yeah. So he's sort of right there along with Josh in the sense of historically Republican areas that are trending Democrat. And I do overlap actually with an incumbent. So I overlap 25 precincts with Matt McNally, 10 precincts with Victoria Garcia-Wilbur.
Okay.
Yeah. And then 44 precincts in Noblesville with Chris Hartig. So I think my district has a lot of potential. And as far as just like, I know like the House races are like the secretary races this year and all that kind of stuff. And I get it, like breaking the majority is huge. But I think I would consider my state Senate race also has some momentum behind it. The biggest thing going against maybe my district is overcoming the narrative that like, Democrats can't win in Hamilton County, or, like my district is so large, like maybe it can't be done. But I think if we can break that mentality, there are a lot of Democrats in Hamilton County that just want to know that their vote matters. And I think we have to overcome that sort of idea of apathy of like, well, why even like vote in November? Like it's not going to do anything. And if we can, and we're trying to break this messaging, if we can encourage people that yes, like your vote actually can affect the statewide races in your area. And I think that Hamilton County has a lot that it can do this year. I'm biased, obviously, because I live
Absolutely.
here.
Yeah. But look, anybody that knows me knows that I am not a shameless Democratic Party shill. But I believe the suburbs, not just Hamilton County, not just Indianapolis's suburbs, but nationally, suburbs all over the country, that dam is going to break this year.
Yeah.
and all these, the country club Republicans, or as they were called, they're
Mhm.
they are largely done with the
Yes.
Republican Party. I think with that extremism, with Trump, with the abortion rights.
Yeah.
I absolutely think the dam is breaking on the suburbs this year, and a lot of them are turning blue, and we're hoping you're going to ride that wave.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess if we could bring this full circle, because I 100% agree with you that the extremism in the Republican Party has sort of driven the moderate center, and hopefully, potentially Democratic voters. And I think one thing that proves your point is the way that Trump has now doubled down on his sort of Christian nationalism, that conservative
Mhm.
church code. I think he sort of is reading the tea leaves, or at least his um, campaign is, and I think they're realizing that if they're losing that moderate voter in the suburbs, they're going to really have to bring out that hardcore Christian,
Mhm.
it's like evangelistic sort of voter, because that's what they had. They've almost made themselves so insular. They're like driving pastors to like do like get out the vote efforts. Like they are like really hammering this Christian nationalism thing hard. And you saw it at the Republic. I mean, like this sort of messianic images that they were using on Trump is just sort of
Oh, yeah, it is. It's absolutely. It's look. I, I'm not a Christian, but I'm offended on behalf of Christians. Right? It is blasphemous.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, especially after the shooting and missing it and missing his. I mean, it was just like he's ascended now to a place that just is nauseating.
Yeah,
Um,
it is.
but yeah,
It's cringy, right? The kids, is that what the kids say? Do they still say that? Is it cringe?
right. But what you're hoping is that you see in the suburbs is this sort of like critical thinker, like someone that's just not completely bought into the identity politics of just like, okay, let's hold on a second. What is the most logical candidate for me to choose that has my, what I want at heart, just like who is actually trying to be like a public servant rather than just, a figure trying to have their way.
Yeah, man. Whiteness is a hell of a drug. It's hard to overcome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are a couple more things that you list that you want to prioritize in Indianapolis, and I do want to give you a chance to talk about those still. How about the environment and those issues over there? Y'all not too far from Boone County and the Leap District and all that mess. That's not good.
Yes. Yes. That is a hot topic around here as far as just like water access and what that project really means as a whole. And I think one thing that was sort of disturbing about this most recent session was the very first bill that sort of flew through the House and the Senate, and that was repealing the wetlands in Indiana. And you just,
Hey, wasn't that one authored by your opponent?
you may have co-authored it. I'd have to look that one up, but yeah, yeah. His famous one this year was the Bobcat legislation.
Ah, yes, yes. Real important priorities for.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
that's what. Yeah, we don't want affordable housing. We want a bag of Bobcat.
Yes, yes. But what you sort of see is this, and I've realized it now more that I've entered into the politics more closely. How much self enrichment there is among the state house and
Oh,
people that have
yeah.
direct benefits from like whether it be like landowning or repealing wetlands to like encourage more businesses to move in. Um, I mean it's just you see why they choose against the environment so quickly because they have things to gain financially, whether that be the lobbyist efforts or having ties with certain developers in the state. And for me, I would hope and I feel passionate about just like preserving our natural resources, not to the detriment of, you know, what we have. And I guess what you have to realize is that these resources we have in Indiana are finite. And a project like the Leap, if we want to go to that a little bit, I don't want to go too far into it, but
Oh no, I mean no, you don't have to. I mean that's not your district, or but
yeah,
it proves a larger point. about how Republicans in Indianapolis will, sell the state's natural resources and, the very water we need to live out
Yeah.
from under us to their business buddies.
Yeah. And just recently today, I got the email that I was endorsed by the Sierra Club chapter in Indiana. So I'm
Congratulations.
yeah, just trying to partner with people that are just trying to do the right thing and just realize that we can't just keep catering to this sort of capitalistic idea because it can just drain our resources dry.
Last thing on your priorities list, public education. I know you guys have some great public schools there in Hamilton County.
Yes, if I could speak to one thing that is surprisingly, there's actually New York Times articles about this. Surprisingly bonding Democrats and Republicans is the idea of keeping funds in public schools. So I mentioned it. I lived in Nashville. There was an article, I think maybe about a week ago in the New York Times, talking about um, this sort of coalition among legislators in like the Tennessee State House about the schools that they have in like the rural areas having money sort of taken away, and like you know people in the area are getting upset about it, especially like elected politicians that represent those areas. And what you're seeing is that public schools, we've always known, have been a foundation to education, towards just so many different things. But what's happening is that because so much money is going now to these voucher systems, is like it's starting to like really awaken these. You could say parents, you could say teachers in these rural areas where like they don't have a choice to send their kid to like another like a private school. Like I'll use my community for example. Like Cicero, like my child is going into kindergarten this fall, 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited for him. But him,
That is great.
yeah, he's great and he's excited. But yeah, I mean, like this community that we have here, like only has Hamilton Heights as like a school option. And if we keep like draining resources from our public schools and going to private schools, you're actually seeing that like this is foundational to this community, and people actually take really big pride in these schools and paying our teachers a decent wage. And if we don't, you're sort of seeing teachers questioning like, is this worth it? Like I don't know if that's fair to say, but like these teachers are like, if we're not going to get increased wage, and then second of all, you have legislators saying like maybe they should like carry firearms to defend themselves. Like if you keep heaping all this stuff onto educators, like it's just not right. And I just want to be a voice for keeping the money in the public schools. Obviously, it seems common sense, but that's one thing I feel passionate about. But also just like understanding that this doesn't have to just be a Democratic idea, and you're actually seeing Republicans get really energized. It just happens to be in the rural areas where it's starting to sort of make some momentum in some ways.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Those school now, like in Hamilton County, you have a large property tax base to draw from for your public schools. These rural communities don't have that. They're really counting on the state to make up that difference. And frankly, now this might not be popular up in Hamilton County. I think schools should be funded by local property taxes because that inherently leads to disparities between the wealthier areas and the less wealthy areas. But that's way deep in the weeds and probably too much for us here today. So we got a couple minutes here left, Joel. Do you want a couple minutes to trash your opponent? Because I gotta look, maybe you're too good a guy for that, but look, this is a guy, Scott Baldwin, state senator, District 20, spent a long time as a cop. Yeah. Again, great, thank you, appreciate your service, yada yada. This dude is also a lifetime NRA member. Now, how are you going to be a cop and want more guns on the street? It does not make sense.
It doesn't. It doesn't, and it seems so counterintuitive. And even just the idea of just like the concealed carry. I mean, there are a lot of law enforcement that would say this actually makes Indiana, um, just like a more unsafe place. Um, as far as repealing that, like that's a hard uphill battle. But yeah, the idea that he could be pro law enforcement, yet also be an advocate for like more guns out there is just, I don't understand the argument. I really don't. I think a lot of people use the argument like,
I
yeah,
understand the argument. Listening and not watching, I'm making the cash sign with my hands, and I bet
yes,
NRA contributions are probably super sweet.
yes, yeah. But
Well, Joel, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, like, I think there are, along with the NRA, there are people that in my opinion, are doing really good things, and the number one group that, in my opinion, is Moms Demand Action. I partner with them a lot and done door knocking with them and gone to different meetings. There's a Hamilton County chapter. It's just, I think it just has to come back to that sort of parental narrative of just like, these are our children. Like this idea that it has to be partisan just doesn't add up, and it is just detrimental to this next generation. Because I say that the number one reason I'm running for office is for public safety, and it is. But wrapped into that is like, I want to leave this state better than I found it. Like, this is for my son. Like, this is for people that are coming after us. And you see this younger generation, whether they be 8, 9, or 10 years old. My son's 5, but so he's not quite in that age group. But like, active shooter drills are the norm. You see this shift of just like, where we're heading, of just like, we have to say like, where we're heading is not right. What our example is to the rest of the world, people look at us like we're absurd. Just the amount of gun violence we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean, the loyalty to these firearms goes beyond safety measures, and it's definitely identity politics. And it's just like, I'm doing this and I'm putting my neck out here. I'm, you know, battling all the imposter syndrome of being a musician and all this kind of stuff, because like, I believe it's the right thing to do. And it's just like, like there are a lot of people that will look at their TV and just say like, this is awful. Like, what's going on with our country? And they'll just continue to yell at their TV. And I get that. Like, I was that person. And it's just like, unless we do something, and I'm hoping that whether I win or lose, I can be an advocate for just making this state a better place and keeping these conversations going, because that's why protecting our environment matters. That's why keeping our children safe matters, is because we have a responsibility to the next generation. And yeah, a little bit of a side tangent there, but it really speaks to like why I'm doing this.
It really does. And you know what? That's a good place to sort of like bring this thing home. Why don't you give the people your sort of closing pitch? And do not forget to tell people where they can find you, that website, maybe some social media. Where can they donate and
Yes.
volunteer?
Yeah, absolutely. So please check out my website. It's joellevi for Indiana.com. On there is a very quick link to donate to my Act Blue page. So if you go to my website, that's a great way to donate to the campaign. Also, if you happen to live in the Hamilton County area, I'd be more than happy to have you help the campaign and do some door knocking or postcard writing. That's also on the website, where you can enter your email address and I'll reach out to you. And also, if you live in Marion County, if you want to move politics forward for Democrats in Indiana, drive 35 minutes north, come do, some door knocking, try to grow, these donut counties. There's a lot of potential happening in Hamilton County. So if you live in Marion County and want to sort of make some waves and sort of spread this sort of Democratic presence, Hamilton County is a great way to do that.
Absolutely, that's a good idea. Help your neighbors if you're in a, say, a safe district as you were.
Exactly.
All right, excellent. Well, Joel Levi, appreciated you being here tonight. Thank you so much for joining the Who's Left podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott, so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Joel Levi, candidate for Indiana State Senate, District 20. So, a few weeks ago, I spoke to candidate for state rep up in District 83, Kyle Teeley, and toward the end of that interview, I set him up to bash the Republican incumbent Chris Judy. And Kyle, being the kind, thoughtful gentleman he is, basically took the high road. So I took the liberty of getting down in the dirt and slinging mud at Judy myself. It was a good time. And today, again, compassionate Christian Joel Levi demonstrated the kind, empathetic leadership he hopes to bring to the state Senate when provided the opportunity to smear his opponent, Scott Baldwin. It looks like I'm going to have to get dirty again. In my takedown of Judy, I listed a whole slew of his worst legislative offenses. The anti-LGBTQ bigotry, the gun nuttery, the wholesale gutting of public education. One thing I didn't get to was the fact that his name was one of 23 Hoosiers that popped up in 2022 when the Anti-Defamation League Center on Extremism, looking for elected officials, law enforcement, and military personnel, combed through 38,000 plus entries in leaked membership lists from the Oath Keepers. You remember the Oath Keepers, right? Members of this large but loosely organized collection of right-wing anti-government extremists were heavily involved in the planning and coordination of the January 6th Capitol insurrection. Among the at least 24 Oath Keepers charged was founder and leader Stuart "You'll Shoot Your Eye Out" Rhodes, who was sentenced to 18 years in prison for seditious conspiracy and other charges related to that day. Well, you know who else's name had appeared previously in that same data leak? That's right, Scott Baldwin. Now, the ADL does add this caveat on their website, quote, "It's important to acknowledge that some individuals in the Oath Keepers database may have initially joined because they were sold a watered-down version of the group, and some may have disavowed the group since signing up. Judy claims he hasn't had anything to do with the group since 2015, Baldwin since 2010. But the ADL continues. Even for those who claim to have left the organization when it began to employ more aggressive tactics in 2014, it is important to remember that the Oath Keepers have espoused extremism since their founding. And this fact was not enough to deter these individuals from signing up." End quote. Given the time that had passed in his case, I might have been inclined to let Baldwin slide on this one, but he didn't exactly denounce the organization when given a chance, and then in 2022, he really let the hood slip. That January, he authored, and by authored, I mean put his name on a bill handed to him by ALEC, or another such organization, Senate Bill 167, one of a whole host of stupid, inane, worthless pieces of legislation introduced in red states across the country in response to the manufactured critical race theory controversy. In a committee hearing, Fisher's history teacher Matt Bockenfeld voiced his concerns. Quote, "For example, it's the second semester of U.S. history, so we're learning about the rise of fascism and the rise of Nazism right now. And I'm just not neutral on the political ideology of fascism. We condemn it, and we condemn it in full. And I tell my students the purpose, in a democracy, of understanding the traits of fascism is so that we can recognize it and that we can combat it. Of course, we're neutral on political issues of the day. We don't stand up and say who we voted for or anything like that. But we're not neutral on Nazism. We take a stand in the classroom against it, and it matters that we do." End quote. Well, that was a bridge too far for Baldwin, who responded, quote, "I have no problem with the education system providing instruction on the existence of those isms. I believe that we've gone too far when we take a position on those isms. We need to be impartial. I'm not sure it's right for us to determine how that child should think, and that's where I'm trying to provide the guardrails." End quote. So to paraphrase, Scott Baldwin said, "It's wrong to tell children that fascism was bad. You report, they decide." Fair and balanced, right? Well, this rightly drew a ton of criticism from the Indy Star to the Jerusalem Post, and he had to backtrack. Seems like these Indiana Republicans keep telling us what they really believe until they get called out. Scott Baldwin has only held his seat in the Indiana State Senate for one term, but it should already be painfully obvious by this point that his politics are too extreme for a rapidly diversifying Hamilton County and too extreme for Hoosiers. Let's send him packing before he gets too comfy. And hey, I'm sure he'll land on his feet. With that kind of talent for lazy, both sides are the same, false moral equivalence, there's surely a job waiting for him in mainstream media. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to Joel Levi. Find him at joelleviforindiana.com. Donate. Volunteer. Let's help get him over the finish line. Find me at scottaaronrogers.substack.com, and if you can, help support this project with a paid subscription. My Substack is a one-stop shop for everything I publish, but you can also find me on social media on Facebook, Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok at HoosLeft, and on most other sites at ScottRog78. Please give me feedback, tips, ideas, concerns. My DMs are open. Or email me at scottrog78@gmail.com. Forward the show to a friend and have them forward it to another friend. Let's keep building this project and a democratic Indiana, brick by brick. Until next time, this has been the Who's Left podcast. I'm Scott Aaron Rogers. Love each other, Indiana.